Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and today I'm continuing in my series of reviewing every element one at a time and every unit in it. And today we're going to be starting with Kefka. And Kefka is pretty easy, because if you saw my win video, he is fire solidly. That means that he's going to have a lot of status, a lot of magic damage, and a lot of shenanigans. He is going to be a very tricky mage to fight. The two main distinctions from Sodley is that he is a glove user, not a mace user. So he has natural synergies with units like Roy Mustang especially, but also Summer Helena or Garvel, other glove units if you have the right BCs for that. But also, obviously, that he's a fire unit, and in my opinion, this is actually to his detriment because already the perfect counter for units like him often is Celeste, and this is pretty much no exception. He has one chance to get Celeste, and that's pretty much going to be his limit break, and then after that he is going to be a trash can against her. So it'll be incredibly easy to guard against the one status on his limit break and then just absolutely shut this unit down. Now, I'm not saying that he's a garbage unit. He's going to be pretty cool. I'm just saying that he might be a little risky to run on defense because he is going to be a really no-brainer to counter. Roy Mustang in a nutshell. For most viewers of this channel, this is not a character that I recommend you pull. And that's really because, like, first of all, Edward is free. He's an awesome unit. You might as well invest in him if you want a 90 cost unit out of this collaboration. If you are really trying to pull a unit off of this collaboration, it should probably be Bradley. Although, if you were really going into strike, it should probably be Alphonse. But if you do go for Roy Mustang, here's two things to keep in mind. High damage, high accuracy. He hits, and he hits hard, and he hits reliably. He's not a bad unit. It's just he's limited. There are already a lot of things taking your Viz right now, or potentially Kefka to take your Viz later. And if you're a fire player and you went for Sorrow and Yuffie, maybe after Valentine's Ildira, then you're already pretty broke, let's face it. So maybe we skip Roy Mustang, but if you do, he's a pretty modernized fire unit, and he has glove synergy, so a lot of the same benefits as Sodley. Yuffie is a pretty standout unit, at least at this point, and even with Chunok getting his upgrade, Yuffie is still the most evasive unit that can guaranteed hit avoid. Now, the unfortunate thing for Yuffie is that she came in just before a tide of units that are much more regularly getting moves that have increased accuracy on units that are already fairly accurate to begin with. And this is a really good natural counter because they aren't relying on guaranteed hit moves to hit Yuffie, and since she isn't as evasive as some other evasion units, this actually makes her weaker into modern combos than some of the older evasion units, even though they're weaker in general anti-evasion matchups because of the previous prevalence of guaranteed hit attacks. Sorrow is another powerful limited evasion unit. If you have him, you have him. If you don't have him, you're not going to see him anytime soon, but in a lot of ways he reminds me of like a Fire Bradley if you leaned out of tank busting specifically, although he does have some pretty neat tank busting capabilities to assure his damage. He also has some ways to ensure that his moves hit because he has a very powerful high accuracy move, much like Bradley. But instead of going really hard into absolutely destroying people in CT shenanigans, he instead went really hard into evasion. And often, if you don't have guaranteed hit, if you are relying on your accuracy to hit units, in situations where you're going to find Yuffie easier to hit, Sorrow is actually going to be the unit that is going to be difficult for you. If you're coming into the fight from the other perspective and you're relying on guaranteed hit, you're going to have a lot of trouble with Yuffie, but you might not have as much trouble with Sorrow, even though he does have Courage, which can lead to some problems for certain kind of lighter on the guaranteed hit anti-evasion setups. Revelka is a free, fully farmable MR unit. She is pretty great. She's an Energist, so she can work into the glove synergy. If you want an all-fire glove team that kind of works in limited, you could go for Kefka, Roy Mustang, and Revelka. She can break both missile and magic, which are the two damage types that Energists and glove users tend to switch between. They're not long-range magic missile units like the Jadens are, but they're more like short-range brawler missile magic units, if that makes sense. So those three units have a really good synergy together, and you can pick her up for free. She's going to break in such a way that both of your big damage units are going to be doing bigger, more reliable damage. She's just a really good unit for that synergy, and especially you're going to want to fill this team out with a free unit after going hard on Mustang and Kefka, I think. Valentine's Ildira is becoming one of my favorite non-limited fire units. And did they not get Hio? Why isn't Hio on wotv calc for JP? They already have him. Okay, so Valentine's Ildira is really one of my favorites. And it's mainly because of her LB. It reminds me a lot of Water Ildira's LB. Except that instead of quickening most of your, if not all of your team, if you did your setup right, it's actually going to quicken her and like de-quicken the entire other team if you, again, do your setup right. So this is more of a debuff style CT manipulation Ildira instead of a buff style CT manipulation Ildira, and this really plays into a faster aggressive strategy that works really well with units like Kingmont, Yuffie, and Sorrow. And she's not the most evasive girl in the world. She situationally can be more or less evasive than Yuffie, so take that how you want. Hio is a damage dealer. He is a normal pool 100 cost unit. He's quite powerful. His niche seems to be anti-ice and anti-missile especially. He has courage, he has pretty good penetrations, he has a little bit of issue with defense penetration, but that can be ironed out somewhat. He also has defensive breaks, so it's not the biggest issue in the world. And also he's one of those units that gets an extra counter. His extra counter gives him a pretty beefy heal, so HP or healing power up on him can be pretty cool too. Terra is a brawler magic unit. She has a really big meltdown with a lot of casts, and it's a guaranteed hit. What's not to love? She also has courage to keep her in the game off of a sub job if you run Paladin on her. She's also one of those magic units that can actually utilize the Paladin heal quite well because she has a high magic stat and Paladins usually don't. So she can be really effective at self-healing and staying in the game. Setia is one of the more powerful ranged units in the game. She can absolutely decimate a team from range. The problem is, unlike a lot of other great missile units in this game, she does not have good backup within the fire element. She doesn't necessarily have a beneficial playstyle, so she ends up being kind of like Resol on Wind or something like that, to where she is a strong unit, but she doesn't really have a synergy that puts her over the top. But she's a capable addition to any fire team, I would say, and especially good on certain maps. Minwu is the free selection quest unit for fire, and she is pretty good. She's very hard into being a support. If you can get hate down on this girl early on in the fight, that's really awesome, especially if you turn off her very few offensive capabilities. Maybe leave one on for dire situations. She can quicken as a time mage, always a huge boon to a support unit. But she's also a devout, which brings a lot of really modern supportive skills, a la what I've been talking about for units like Sottily, and also I think kind of comparable, I believe, to some of the supportive capabilities you're going to be getting on Kefka. Glaciella was originally a JP exclusive because she won their first popularity contest, got a 100 cost fire unit that is quite celebratory and badass. Her main job is quite special. It has good chaining. It's kind of like a magical version of her water main job in some ways, instead of a Pierce version, except with a lot more like cool updated kit to it. Unfortunately, she came out a lot later for global than she did on JP, and she wasn't quite as impressive when she came out, but she is a very well balanced unit. She does have Scholar as her sub job, so she can get relatively brawlery, and she also has that magic strike move, which is quite powerful and can heal her up pretty effectively. Or if you want her to play more of a supportive role on your team, she also has white mage, so she's pretty effective in that way too, especially in more manual, maybe in PvE. You aren't going to see her in PvP as much, but she is quite a good unit. Summer Ketone was one of the first summer units. She is a Kodadama wielder, so she feels just a bit vanilla, but she can deal with evasion, and I'm not as sure what else she does. I haven't seen a lot of people play her because she was a little bit before my time, and just over time with other units coming out, she dropped. I don't know what to say. I don't see her. I hear she's okay for what she is, but no one has her. I don't have her. I don't know what to say. Mont, King of Leonis, was such a good... He was like a next level definitive tank when he came out. He was such a pain to deal with and is still one of the more popular and more pulled units in the game. I also think they like to hand him out to new players, and that's great because he's a great unit to build your account around, and he has a lot of versatility. He also benefits from synergizing with a lot of the other VCs that work well with fire teams, so you can often work him into a even more modernized fire team. His 140 gave him a threshold heal, which is really helpful for him and just made him a lot all around harder to beat. So he's kind of like a fire Joom, and I mean, this is obviously going to mean that King Mont and Kefka are going to be really strong together, because we already know that in Wind, you know, Joom and Sodley work well together, and these are kind of carbon copies of those two, only in fire. So why not? Raldor is a strike tank. So he gets up real close to people and beats the crap out of him. He has a lot of abilities that benefit from him being hit multiple times, allow him to deal additional damage based on the number of times that he's been hit so far. So he can really punish people for not being able to take him out. He is especially strong against piercing and missile, which tend to be two of the more ranged forms of damage. So he's a strike unit that has a lot of resistances to things that would stop him from closing in on him. So he's pretty good at getting right up in people's faces regardless of who they are. Being a more physical tank, he does tend probably to fail more to magic, but he's pretty tough. When he gets a 140, he's probably going to be in the rotation for a lot of strike teams for just strategic reasons, even though he may not be one of the most powerful strike units, and it might be a little hard to justify him as a tank when the Pixel Remaster gives us a 140 Snow, because he's just a very strong tank himself. Although I think Raldor situationally is going to be really strong in certain matchups, especially Ice Missile, as he seems to be a pretty perfect counter for it. Luartha is a pretty good gunner. Where gunners work, she's going to work well. She's a lot like Lucia. She's a double gunner, so we got quad shot. We've got things that break down people's speed. And, you know, all of these things work well for gunners. So where gunners work, she's going to work. Winter Macherie is a bit of an older winter unit. She is I want to say, kind of a Dragoon type. So good jump, good mobility around the map, probably good critical and decent damage, but like she just, A lot of the strictly holiday units have very vanilla jobs, so they don't tend to be like really impressive units. They tend to be released just a little bit ahead of time for that job becoming common, but shortly after their release, within a couple of months, that job that was kind of special on them, and I emphasize kind of, is a lot more common as a sub job, so the things that were kind of unique for them become almost more mandatory within a couple of months. So just a lot of times holiday units don't age well. So like winter and summer units especially. And like the exceptions have been the 100 cost summer units. They've really gotten some special stuff to their name. And I think the summer units in general have been pretty cool, but that's just me. Maybe it's something to do with the swimsuit power increase. You know, the smaller a female unit's armor becomes, the more powerful they are. We all know this is a standard within these games. We know this is how they work. So that's the meta, I guess. Delita is not a unit I see very often, but I gotta say, when I see him, I'm impressed by him. He's out here tanking, taking damage like a champ, and sometimes even evading. In addition to that, he, like King Mont, likes to land disable, I believe, and he can be a really oppressive firewall with King Mont. That's usually the kind of the combo that I see him with, maybe with an evasion unit to kind of play off of some of that natural evasion. And I'm not going to say that King Mont's the most evasive unit, but he gets a dodge every once in a while, and for a unit that can take as many hits as he can, adding a couple turns to that clock is always pretty devastating for him. So, you know, like Delita, King Mont, other good evasion unit, evasion can always be kind of surprising. Seymour is an MR unit. He is a high critical, high damage for an MR, decent evasion katana unit. Not a whole lot more to say about him than that. Rain is a magic tank. He has some chaining, he has fire breaks, but he's not necessarily a powerful unit, and he's pretty much fucking blind as a bat. He gets countered super duper hard by Perrine because he is quite weak, which is, to be fair, I'm not necessarily picking on Rain for this, but especially magic tanks have a running track record of being weak to strike. He is no exception to that, and he is pretty good example of that, along with Celeste. But even some physical tanks have trouble with strike, so, you know. But into the future, he will be getting the ability to get a good amount of AoE resistance on him, which is going to make him neat in a variety of scenarios. Not just a more anti-magic meta where he has, in that niche, been falling behind, as he has gotten to be a bit of a dated tank now that we have units like Charlotte out there, and even she has started to become a bit dated. Adelard is a red mage, so much like Rain, he is blind as a freaking bat, but he does have jamming thrust, so I guess it's not all bad. He can dispel re-raise with a chaining move that also breaks spirit, and that jamming thrust is going to raise his spirit, so really hitting the spirit tempo and balance kind of thing with him. Elda is kind of a bulky lancer spear chucker type, and I don't have much to say about him. Like, he was one of the first URs in the game. He was one of the first UR units that I built because he seemed like he would be kind of a wall from the story. And then I got further into the story and realized why thematically he just wasn't going to age well, and also he was also dying a lot in non-story related stuff as well, so I had to switch him out real quick. I don't really recommend anyone build him. He even if he were a good unit at anything that he does, and even if he weren't outclassed in everything that he does by other units, like if you want a Lancer, if you want a subpar Lancer for fire, go with Winter Macherie. No, don't go with Winter Macherie. She's a limited unit. She's harder to build. You might as well go with Elda. But nothing to write home about, unfortunately. Lilith is actually a pretty good MR unit. She is a knight main, which gives her access to a pretty interesting upgraded buff, but doesn't have a lot of buffs. Knight is not a great job, unfortunately. It's very close range, tends to be, but she has AP and TP breaks, which is pretty useful in selection quests, so she can be pretty good for that. She also has Ranger as a sub-job and has access to Barrage, which can really give her bursts of power and or accuracy and or range that really supplements that Knight quite well and kind of balances her out a bit, even as a lower cost unit. But again, I think she shined most in selection quests. Marguerite is a Time Mage main, maybe a Black Mage, I don't know. She has Quicken and she has wide area of effect fire blasting moves. She's interesting, she isn't bad, but I would mainly use her in select quests. Yasholta, like every other Final Fantasy XIV unit, is absolute garbage and also free absolute garbage. So if you really want to build a free fire unit next time 14 comes around, she is that she is free and fire and MR, take her or leave it. Naya, I've heard a lot of good things about Naya, actually, kind of like a discount Minwu. So we've got, oh, okay, so CT buff on Kuraga. That's interesting way to go. Regen, which is aimable. That might be a little awkward, but it might also be better for her. I don't really know how that works out, but she does have full life, which is pretty great, and she has reflect, which is interesting. Might be a little niche. I'm not sure how great that is. Maybe a cool thing to do in manual. I'm not really liking her sub jobs at all. So she's got some white mage stuffs. I don't know. People say she's okay. And being a lower rarity unit, you can really throw a lot at her in Awakening, and it's not bad. Miche turns people into frogs. That's kind of his thing. It was his thing before it was Halloween Lucia's thing. And he also likes to poison people. But yeah, he can turn people into a frog, and when they become a frog, or as they become a frog, even if they don't become a frog, they lose their spirit and their agility by a pretty significant margin. So he has the super toad, I guess. His toad doesn't do damage, so he's not quite as awesome as Halloween Lucia, but he's discount Toad Boy. He's kind of like discount Halloween Lucia, I guess. Ranger is interesting in that it gives him a couple of ways to do ranged status. Maybe poison would be cool. It's not going to do a lot of damage, but just think of it as a really high range, in some cases, way to apply a status with this high faith. Because I'm not seeing a whole lot of impressive stuff and other stuff, I guess he could steal time. That could be interesting, maybe. I don't know. I'm really grasping at straws. He's not great. But that's all the fire units that we got. So, with that being said, I'll see you in the next one.